Well, as long as everyone can hear okay, and I think they can. But yeah, feel free to move forward if you're having any trouble hearing me. I'll have the computer read some things to you, which it might be a little difficult to understand, but it'll show up on the screen as well what it's saying. So that'll always be a handy thing. Are we set to get going? Well, I got no real clear signal, so I guess I will just get started here. So welcome everybody. This is Accessible by Default. I want to cover a couple of things in this presentation, things like why you should be accessible, the benefits there, and a bit of a spoiler alert. It's not just for people who are disabled. Give you some resources and tools and techniques to help make your sites more accessible. And these are things which aren't even Drupal specific. They can apply for any website and any technology that you're working in. Things that are not goals of this presentation. We're not going to talk about accessibility too much at a design level. There's been several Drupal Con presentations over the last couple of Drupal Cons where people have covered things that you can use in Drupal to help enhance your accessibility, considerations that you make at a design level, and that type of thing. They cover things like contrast, color blindness, why you should underline your links. I'll call out a couple given by people from Phase 2, Catherine McNally and David Spira have given one. Catherine's given one at each of the last two North American Drupal Cons. Who am I? Chris Johnson, VP of Engineering with Phase 2 Technology. I'm Tecante, basically anywhere that will matter, Drupal.org, Twitter. I'm very horrible about checking Twitter though. There's going to be a lot of links in these slides. If you go to the session, the slides are all uploaded as a PDF there. Every link that I'm going to talk about is either on the slide that I talk about it or there's a resources section at the end. So don't worry about trying to scramble and write down links and that type of thing. All right, so let's talk about why you should default to accessibility. Number one, customers and clients are starting to expect it as part of just delivering a professional and competent service when you build their websites for them. It'll make your sites better. A lot of the things that you do for accessibility involve applying metadata to the HTML content to describe the structure and the semantic information that is there, and that winds up being good for SEO. It'll make your sites more usable, better organization of content so that as people are skimming or when they're looking at your sites and they're distracted, it's easier for them to use. And it also makes your sites usable in unplanned contexts. Contrast really helps when someone is using your site in bright sunlight, which might not have been a thing that you were planning for. Closed captioning can be super useful for using sites in noisy environments where you can't actually hear, or in sites that are very quiet where you can't make noise. Imagine that you're rocking your child to sleep at night and you want to watch a video. Well, you can't make a lot of noise and accomplish both of those tasks. It's also becoming legally required. In public, websites are increasingly becoming considered places of public gatherings. Winn-Dixie actually just lost a lawsuit where someone filed an American with Disabilities Act against them because some of the functionality of their website wasn't accessible, and they lost that case. Kind of finally, it's the right thing to do to make your sites accessible and help spread information and make it usable for everyone in the world, and it's not as hard as you think. So let's talk about a couple of stats. There are over 1 billion people in the world, about 15% of the world's population, that have some form of disability. And these, some of the ones that we are most concerned about include visual disabilities, that means they have trouble seeing, or they're completely blind, auditory disabilities, which means that they have trouble hearing, or ambulatory disabilities, which most commonly are things like walking or movement, but it includes mobility, so they might have trouble using a mouse and that type of thing. 285 million people have a visual impairment, 39 million of whom are completely blind, 350 million some form of hearing loss. And there's sources from the WHO where I got all that information from. So let's talk about even after someone has assistive technology, some of the difficulties that exist. These are people in the United States as of 2015 who, even after having glasses or having some sort of auditory assistive device, still report having serious difficulty in these categories or are completely disabled. So these are the people who might be completely blind, for example. And take a note of, as you age, how those statistics increase there. making sites accessible is really going to be a gift to your future self when you, as you age and as you begin to have trouble in lots of these areas. And these are permanent disability stats. There's also, I've seen stats range from 20 to 30% that you are likely to encounter at least a temporary disability sometime during your lifetime. So now that I've convinced you, although since you're here, you probably didn't need a lot of convincing, let's talk about, oops, I'm sorry, I lost my slide points here. Let's talk about some of the steps and the philosophies for getting through there to accessible sites. Number one, accessibility is a journey. It's not a destination. You never get to, oh, our site's perfectly accessible. We can stop thinking about it. There's nothing else that we need to do. What you really want to do is you want to start with a good foundation and you want to continually improve it over time because it is something where you can constantly enhance the accessibility of your site. It's like building a house, though. If you don't start with a good foundation, it is much, much more difficult to improve things later on. Think about when responsive design first came about. If you didn't start thinking about your sites in a mobile-first context or planning for it to be responsive from the outset, it was so much more difficult to go back and retrofit it. From a philosophy standpoint, you want to use the correct HTML tags to convey proper semantic meaning about your structure and context. You want to be aware of the standards for both HTML and some of the accessibility standards. You want to know what they are and you want to adhere to them. And then you want to use them to augment your site's information with metadata. There are different tools, and we're going to talk a lot about screen readers here, and then some tools that will help you test and keep an eye on your accessibility of your sites. And there are established patterns to follow, and that can help make you a better developer because you start with things that people have already done before. It gives you something to just pick up and run with instead of having to invent it all from scratch. And I'll give you some resources for all of those things. As I talk, you're going to hear me use the word alley a lot. Some people pronounce that A11Y, some pronounce it A11Y. It's a numeronym. It's just formed from the first and last letters of accessibility and then the number of letters removed. You've probably seen this in context with things like internationalization, I-18N, or localization, L10N. People pronounce it lots of different ways, but it's an A, a 1, and a Y there. And that can be a good thing to search for or follow hashtags about if you're interested in keeping up with accessibility. So number one thing you have to do, you have to know your HTML. You have to know how tags map to different accessibility items, things like landmarks, which I'll show you here in just a second. And then what sort of landmarks exist so that you can explicitly declare particular landmarks and things in your sites for things that don't have implicit semantics. So if you'll take a look in the bottom left-hand side, you can see an outline of the document structure. On the right-hand side, there is the landmarks rotor from VoiceOver. Think about when someone who comes to your site is visually impaired, how they try to navigate it. They can't look at it and get a sense of, oh, here's where important information is located. So a lot of the accessibility tools in screen readers offer this landmarks functionality for you. It gives someone a quick way to pop up a tool that will say, oh, here are all the important areas of the site, and you can navigate to jump to them. I'm going to take just a second here, and I'm going to actually show you how all those things work. Banner landmark is automatically applied to the header. So the header there, as long as the header is not in an aside tag or a section tag, so it only applies automatically when it's a top level tag there. The navigation role automatically applied to the nav tag, and you can have multiple nav tags on a page. And I'll show you in a couple of slides here how you can let people know which navigation item they might be interacting with. The main role, you should only have one of those on the page, and it should surround your main area of content. A lot of the Drupal themes have the links that are like jump to main content that you'll usually see as the first link on the page. That's also a corollary here to the main role. Section tags do not automatically get any role applied to them at all. Aside tags automatically get the complementary role applied to them. Footer tag does not automatically get a role, but people often expect that there is a content info role applied to something on your site that gives information about the content. So whether it be a copyright or more explicit information there. So talking a little bit about these implicit tag semantics. How can you know what semantics are going to apply there? This is the URL. It's the Aria usage note. I'm going to show you really quick what that looks like. Here is where you can go. And if you jump down here, it'll give you all this information about the tags, implicit semantics, and that type of thing. There's tons of information here about accessibility, and there's going to be a lot more Aria pages that you'll see as we go through here. So now I'm going to let you hear and experience what listening to a screen reader actually sounds like. So before I turn this on, one of the first things you're going to want to know is how you turn it off. This is with a Mac. It's using VoiceOver. Command F5 turns it on. Command F5 again turns it off. And Control is the button that you hit to make it stop reading.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Demonstration of use of page sections. Window. Demonstration of use of page sections. HTML content as keyword focus. Links menu.
So normally,
landmarks menu.
When someone is using VoiceOver, the first thing they'll do on your page is pop up what's referred to as the rotor. So I've just popped that up using Control-Option-U, and then I've used the left and right arrows to navigate around to the landmark panel for that. As you can see,
banner.
Someone can just use the arrows and walk through. Notice how things are highlighted.
Complementary.
That's just outlining what section has that particular tag applied to it. Someone would typically just hit enter.
This is content supporting the main content, but separate and meaningful on its own.
And it'll jump VoiceOver to that and let it start reading for them.
VoiceOver off.
Okay, so I've shown you a couple of things here with the tool called VoiceOver. If you have Mac, it's already there for you. If you don't use a Mac, if you use Windows, you're probably going to be looking at a tool like JAWS or a tool like NVDA. JAWS is a commercial tool. It's a little expensive, but NVDA is free. One thing you can also use, and especially if you're on Linux, where I have no idea what the accessibility tools look like there, but if you install the Chrome accessibility extension, and I'll point it out as we go through a little bit later, there's a tab in the Chrome developer tools that will show you what a screen reader would be reading to someone for any particular element. And screen readers are pretty important because as web developers, one of the primary things we're going to be concerned about is visual impairment for people using our site. A couple of pro tips here. You want to use the HTML lang attribute and set the language for your site. That'll have the pronunciation of your screen reader use the correct pronunciation. And there's a couple of YouTube videos that you can go to, and it'll show you when that is misapplied, how content is even more increasingly difficult to understand as the screen reader reads it to you. And as you can tell, they're already not great at pronunciation. I assume that was probably pretty difficult to understand there. So we've covered sort of the basic landmarks and that type of thing, but there's certainly a way that you can do a lot better job with your landmarks. You know, the ones that we just saw there were okay, but they didn't really communicate a lot of information to our visitors and things. So there's a thing that you can use called, it's an attribute called the Aria Label. And here you can see I've applied it to the header, I've applied it to the primary navigation, I've applied it to an aside, and you can see how it modifies how a screen reader is going to read these elements to someone. Really quickly, I will give you a demonstration of that. Come on, VoiceOver.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Form controls, no items in web window. Form controls, web, no items in demonstrate window spots. Demonstration of use links no landmarks menu. You are currently in a
Okay, so there, when I first initiated VoiceOver, the entire screen had focus, so it wasn't bringing up the landmarks window. I had to click inside of the window to get the landmarks there. And I've noticed with VoiceOver, as you click around, if you have the rotor up, it doesn't always refresh. So sometimes you have to hit escape, close the rotor, hit Control Option U to bring it back up, and then you can get the refresh content. So here you can see,
Navigation and search banner.
we've got the things reading out.
Primary links navigation.
That's a lot more useful information than just navigation, especially if you're going to have several pieces of navigation on your site. You can say, hey, this is the primary navigation, this is footer navigation, and that type of thing. One thing which may be a little tough to see, look way down in the very right-hand corner. I've highlighted, let me get to
Main
it.
statistics sidebar complementary.
So here I've added the Aria Label statistics sidebar to that aside. It's the top right one outlined in red there. But with the Chrome accessibility extension installed, when you're on that element, you'll have an accessibility properties, and it'll show you what a screen reader is going to read to someone. Another tip here, you have to close the rotator before you try to close VoiceOver, or it just sort of loses its mind. So that's an interesting tip to know there. So let me get back to the slides. So I've covered a couple of things without giving you a whole lot of context. We've talked about this Aria label. You keep hearing me say Aria all the time. You hear me talk about roles and context and that type of thing, and you might be wondering what those are. So Aria is a standard out of the Web Accessibility Initiative for accessible rich internet applications. These couple of links right here give you the intro to Aria page. This is what it looks like. It's probably the first thing that'll come up on Google if you just search for WHI accessibility or WHI Aria Overview. And it gives you lots of pointers to lots of technical specifications. But here you see the link to the WHI Aria 1.1 specification. And that is the place that you can go to, and it'll give you information about what landmarks are available for you, right? So we've already covered banner and complementary content info, but you can see there's a few others. There's form, there's search, there's region. If you have a page, a site which is an all-in-one application, there's even an application thing that you can mark a page as if you need to. This was just a screenshot in case the internet wasn't working for me. So in addition to things like landmarks, at least VoiceOver gives, and most of the other tools give a couple of key things that you're going to want to take into account. Before I show you these, let's talk about the last two. So window spots and web spots are not things that you can control as a web developer. They're for things like the application window. So window spots might say, hey, this is your bookmarks area. This is your location bar. This is your status area. Web spots is automatically inferred from the structure of the page. Or it is something where a user has put some explicit markings onto the page using the accessibility tool. So let's take a look at some of those on a page that has a lot more content on it.
VoiceOver on landmarks menu.
So here we have the landmarks menu. As you can see, I have a search area that I've declared in the top right-hand corner that,
No item, landmark map, search.
that someone can get to. The rest of these, I've just
Links,
better
example,
named things like our
complementary.
links area. I'm going to let you take a
Heading level 1, over, landmarks menu. You are currently in a voice.
I'm going to let you take a look at that list of landmarks menu. That's not even very useful for a sighted user because I just generated a lot of them, but I want to call out a couple of pieces here. So when I go to the my links rotor,
No item, form, headings, links menu.
so you can see it goes through
Internal link. Internal link.
each link on a page.
Internal link. About us.
You can see how the read more for someone who can't see the context around the read more becomes not very useful.
Visited link. Read more. Visited link. Read more.
But there are a couple of techniques that you can use to make this a lot more useful. So you can use the Aria label.
Visited link. Get more details about blurb 4. Added by Aria Label attribute.
So here's one where I've just used Aria Label and put an extended description there.
Visited link. Read more about blurb 3. Added via an element it is not visible. Heading level 1. Over.
Another technique that you might want to be aware of is you can take you can do things like add content in a span. Hopefully you can see it. It's down here at the very bottom, inside of the link content. And you can use things like your positioning to just make that disappear off the page. Now, one key thing is you don't want to use position or display equals none, because that actually will take it out of the rendering tree, and even the screen reader won't read it. One other thing to call out here.
Overview links menu. Heading form controls menu.
So form controls, I have a couple of forms on this page. As you can see, it doesn't really group all of the elements into which logical form they belong to. So you might want to consider how you're actually labeling your form elements as well. Finally,
Windows links headings menu.
your headings. This is another thing that someone can use to skim content pretty quickly and jump to the area that they're really concerned about. Things that you should know about labels is that you should not skip levels. There's no automatic sort of, you might see some things referring to like an automatic document outline generator. That's not a thing that actually is implemented by any browser. So have one H1 tag, use your H2s and H3s and so on correctly to form a nice outline for your user. So as they scroll through the headings, they get a good idea of what the structure of the content is. Now that is something that falls back more on your content editors, but those are things that as developers you might want to be aware of, and just make sure you're not slapping H1 tags everywhere. One other thing to note here, the field sets that you might see here in the forms are not actually read as part of form elements. That's just a handy thing to know.
No items in heading level 1. Voiceover off.
All right, so now let's talk about some tools, because while screen readers are great, it can be super labor intensive to try to use them to test, and it can require a lot of expertise about what's expected of you from standards in order to do some testing. Tool number one, the Totally plugin from Khan Academy. So Khan Academy has a little JavaScript snippet you can add to a page. It'll give you a little item in the lower left-hand corner of your page that you can click on. Several plugins that you can go through that gives you information about how well you're adhering to heading standards, contrast standards, that type of thing. There on the right-hand side, you can see information about sort of about what the error is, where the errors are, and things like that. This is also available as a Drupal module to give you integration with, also available as a Chrome extension. The CK editor alley checker. So this is more for your content editors than for you as a developer. But once you've installed this, and this is available as a Drupal module as well, once you've installed this, that little thing in the top left-hand corner there that looks like a person, a content editor can click on that. It'll automatically perform some accessibility checks and help them out and realize where things like alt text is missing from images. Another one is the Wave toolbar. This has several browser extensions. It's really similar to Khan Academy's. The thing I like about the Wave toolbar is you can actually tell it to filter the errors that it reports based on particular compliance levels that you might be trying to reach. So you can say, hey, just show me the things that mean I don't match WCAG 2.0 AA or AAA or single A compliance. So in addition to Aria Label, which we've talked about, there's a lot of Aria attributes that you should be aware of, and these are some of the common ones, as well as some other attributes. If you go to the Aria link that I have here, they give you a very nice breakdown of what all the Aria attributes are, what they mean, how you can use them, and that type of thing. So I want to run through the ones here that I've called out on this page as the important ones. So Aria controls, especially when you're doing things with JavaScript, where clicking on an element is going to make another element appear or disappear. You put the ID of the element that's being controlled by the thing that you're clicking on here. And that just helps screen readers know, oh, this area of the page is probably going to change compared when someone interacts with another area. Aria describe by. So Aria Label is nice for short things. But occasionally you're going to want to put a very long description, and you might have the same description you want to apply to a lot of different elements on a page. Rather than replicating that in an Aria label, you can put Aria described by, put that description in like a span that you hide, and then just point all of those items there to reference, and it can read the text there. Aria hidden and Aria disabled, these are attributes that let the screen reader know, is this thing actually available on the page right now or not on the page? Can it be interacted with or not be interacted with? Aria hidden also overlaps with like the hidden HTML attribute. And whenever you have the option to use sort of standard HTML attributes, the recommendation is to use those and then use the Aria items when you find that those aren't working or when there's not one available to provide the context that you're interested in. Aria Live is a very interesting one because you can mark a region of a page as something where maybe status messages appear or that type of thing. And when you mark that region as Aria Live, and there's a couple of different ways you can do it, when the content changes, the screen reader will automatically read that change to people even if they're not focused on that item. And you can basically tell it to be aggressive or not aggressive as to whether or not it'll just interrupt whatever it's otherwise reading or if it'll just read it at the end. And aggressive and not aggressive are not the actual values there. Go look at the specs for what the value should be. Then tab index is one that's not an Aria attribute, but it's very important that you consider what your tab index is, and especially as you're doing things with tab panels and as someone is going to be interacting with your site using a tab key, to make sure that as someone hits tab, like they jump to the next logical thing that they should be reading. So considering that's really important. I would not recommend setting tab index in any of the positive integers, but -1 and 0 are the things you can use to say someone can tab to this right now or someone can't tab to that right now. Once you start getting to trying to control the tab order very explicitly, I think you're going to buy yourself a lot of trouble in maintaining and keeping that up to date. So standards, quick thing to know about standards, at least in America, Section 508 now references the web content, I believe that's Web Content Accessibility Group standards at levels A and AA. If you just make yourself familiar with WCAG 2.0 A, AA, and AAA, you're going to be far ahead of the game. There's some European standards that you can look into if you're doing sites that are going to be relevant there, but these are the ones for the United States market. So a couple of principles that you should take away from things when you're working about accessibility, working with accessibility, and how you make sure that you're on a good foundation. So number one, don't abuse semantics for presentation, and heading tags is one place where this is frequently done. Use your heading tags to convey your structural and your semantic outline. Use a class that you apply into whatever heading tag is there to control your presentation. That way you don't get people into situations where they're like, well, I had to use an H1 tag because that's what I wanted it to look like, when really they should have been using like an H3 tag or that type of thing. Do leverage semantics for presentation where they align, right? So if you make your CSS trigger based off of Aria hidden equals true or false, then all of a sudden you have to do the right thing from an accessibility standpoint to make your content work just generally. And that'll help keep accessible things and your just normal presentation aligned. Think about how someone's going to use your site if they can only use a keyboard or if they can only use a mouse. Typically what that's going to mean is everywhere you have a hover state, what happens when someone focuses there? Or you probably need to make hover and focus synonyms so that as someone tabs around your site, things work as expected. Let's see here. You want to start with known and tested patterns, and I'm going to give you some resources in just a minute about where you can go and find all of these known and tested patterns. You want to use Aria things to augment stuff where core support's not yet implemented, right? So don't ignore what the native HTML attributes on an element are in favor of the Aria ones. Use the native ones first, and then if it doesn't convey the meaning that you need to, then jump over to the Aria ones. Finally, you're going to want to experiment with this stuff a lot. It's very easy to hit an accessibility standard and still have your site be not that usable. And if we have time, I'll do an example with the tab panel to show how that can come out. So pattern matching. From an accessibility standpoint, one of the things that you want to pay attention to is what is the pattern of content that I have here, right? Do I have a tab panel? Do I have a menu tree? Do I have a slider? That type of thing. Recognizing what sort of pattern of content you have is then going to let you refer to one of the libraries I'm about to show you, where you can just go pick up someone who's already implemented that pattern to an accessible standard and start from there. So first thing you have to do is you have to know what all the patterns that are available are. So at the Aria Practices 1.1 note, if you look on the left-hand side there, you can see it starting to talk about all of the patterns that are available. And let's see if I get to, here we go. So here you can see all of these things like, oh, it's a spin button pattern, it's a slider pattern. And this note is very helpful because as you get down to things like tab panel, they even have examples for you that you can refer to. So this is already your first great resource for going and lifting code that is already tested and accessible. But there's a lot of other ones. The Open Ajax Alliance has an entire chart of patterns that you can look at. It talks about the Aria roles and the context that are important for it. Here's just a quick look at what that looks like for you. So they have all of this information and plenty of information and pointers for you about what things you'll need to apply to make use of it. The Ali Style Guide is a lot of accessibility things, but it's sort of presented in more of a style guide format. It's very nice. If you're going to do some testing with VoiceOver, I highly recommend the webaim.org article on VoiceOver. It'll give you all the key commands that you're going to need to use, and you're probably going to want to screenshot it and put it right there on your monitor or print it out right beside you, because there are a lot of different key commands that you can do. You can have it read a paragraph to you, read a sentence, read a word, spell a word. The sort of capabilities there are endless, and it takes a little bit of time to learn. Pally.org offers a lot of resources that you can use for command line testing. So things as you get into continuous integration, they have a lot of tools that you can use there to automatically check accessibility. Friend.co, that is one that if you're worried about how much do I have to pull in from a dependency standpoint or a library standpoint, those are very trim examples from a dependency standpoint for accessibility. The Athena site has, again, another set of components that you can look at, and there's a lot of replication between these. I do recommend you try a couple of different ones out and you can see what the difference is. Oh, if I implement it this way, how does the screen reader read something to me? If I implement it that way, what happens? And then I also like to call out standards.usa.gov. So they have a lot of their components, but one really nice thing they have in their documentation is they have information of things to consider from an accessibility standpoint for each of the patterns that they're talking about there. All right, so it looks like I still have about 10 minutes, so I've got enough time to do a quick tab panel example for you, and then we can take questions. So I just pulled up a simple tab panel from, this one came from the Open Ajax Alliance. I'm going to run through and show you this one, and then I'll run through and show you how someone, some things that you can do to give people better information about how to use these.
VoiceOver on Chrome. Example 3 set. Collapsed crust. Selected collapsed tab. 1 of 4. You are currently on a tab. 1 of 4. To select this option, press Control Option Space. Expanded crust. Selected expanded tab. 1 of 4.
So that's what happens when I choose Control Option Space. Then as a user, I might think, oh, I should just tab. And that actually does work in this.
Selected radio button. 3 of 4. List select crust for items.
Right, so someone knows what radio button they're on, what part of a form element it's on.
Thin radio button. 4 of 4.
So right there, I just use what's referred to as VoiceOver right or VoiceOver left. That's Control Option right arrow, Control Option left arrow. That's just how in VoiceOver someone moves sort of to the next element on a page.
Expanded crust. Select collapse.
All right, so I hit Shift Tab to jump back to the top. I hit Control Option Space to collapse it, and now I can continue to use my voiceover left and right.
Collapse veggie, collapse carnivore, collapse delivery.
To navigate through it. So this one is not too bad from an accessibility standpoint. You can see it gives pretty good information about how to use it, although someone does have to know, oh, you know what, I should hit Tab. I need to know that I should use voiceover left and right to navigate through it. But it's reasonable that someone who actually needs to use one of these devices probably knows something about that. Now, I want to show you one that we had done for a client where we used the Aria describe by to give that to add that additional information about how to use an item for a tab panel. And this is actually a set of nested tab panels here.
Senior leadership, selected tab, 1 of 4. Use the left and right arrow keys to navigate between tabs. Use the tab key to move to the first link in the tab panel. You are currently on the tab, 1 of 4, inside of HTML content. Clinical leadership, selected regional administration and hospitals, selected tab, 3 of 4. Use the left and right arrow key.
Right, so you can see it's repeating that instruction over and over and over again, so that no matter how the page state is when someone shows up and when they jump to it, they understand how to use it. They understand that they should be hitting
Central region, Eastern region, North link. Jason made it.
They understand they should be using Tab to move through the various links that are available there. And this is a good example of where you would want to use that described by, because you don't want to repeat that instruction every single place that you have a link. You want to have it once and then just have all of them refer back to it.
Voiceover off.
So these are all the references. So anything that didn't have the link actually on the slide while I talked about it, the link is here somewhere for you. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions anyone has. All right. Yeah, go ahead.
For multi-select items, when you use like select to, is select to accessibility minded, or is it not?
I don't know the actual, so he asked for multi-select items, where a thing where you might have used like select to, for example. Is select to sort of accessibility minded? Does it do the right thing from an accessibility standpoint? I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head, although I do know one of our clients who is highly concerned with accessibility used the select to library, so my guess is that yes it is, but I don't know for sure.
One more question.
Yep.
Slideshows. Are there implementations of it that are possibly accessible, or are you going to not ever be able to do a slideshow, a slider with accessibility?
So he asked, slideshows, are there implementations of that which can be accessible? So do you mean carousels? Okay, so carousels can be accessible, but the recommendation is if you do have them on the page that they do not automatically rotate, because I could bring one, I don't have one at hand, but if you bring it up as it starts automatically rotating, at least with VoiceOver, as soon as that thing rotates once, it starts reading the thing that's in the page to you, and then it rotates again. So it completely interrupts the flow for someone. So I would say, at least from a carousel standpoint, you're probably going to want to use a lot of the same concepts from a tab panel, right? You want to get a user to the element. You want to tell them how many elements are there. You want to tell them how they can navigate left and right through it, how to jump down and read a particular element there. But at least automatic carousels are not recommended at all from an accessibility standpoint.
Do you have any recommendations on technology to use JavaScript libraries?
I do not have particular ones there, no. Yeah.
I don't know if you mentioned before, but I'm kind of missing the parts like the size of the letters.
Mm-hmm.
Best practices for colors on the sides or color line.
Yeah, so he asked about sizes of letters on sites, contrast ratios. That's what's usually referred to as the color of letters, and considerations for colorblind people. I don't cover those. Those are usually design considerations. What I will say is, from an implementation standpoint, don't prevent someone from changing the font size, right? Don't make it where they can't zoom in on the screen and that type of thing. I actually worked in a disability lab in college, and some of our users could see, though only barely, and one of the tools that they would use was a screen magnifier, and they would make the screen highly zoomed in and that type of thing. Most of those are design considerations, though. If you'll go to either of the last 2 North American Drupal Cons and look for accessibility presentations, they cover some tools and techniques you can use to check color blindness and that type of thing. So color blindness is a particular, there's like a particular set of tools. Usually you look at things in grayscale, or there's ones that you can say, show me all my images as though someone were red-green colorblind, or if they had, there's like a blue shift colorblind, and several other mechanisms there. A lot of these tools, however, though, will tell you and warn you, hey, your contrast ratio is too low. And at least they can't tell you what color it should be, but they can tell you the color is not distinct enough against the background. You do have to be a little careful with that, because they're not always perfect at recognizing what the background is that the text is on. But you know, anywhere where things kind of look washed out is probably not great from a contrast ratio standpoint. There is, I think, a particular recommendation. I think it's something like 3.5 or that type of thing for the contrast ratio. But when it complains to you, it'll tell you what it is trying to hit. Yeah, go ahead.
What about interpreters, what are they?
Yeah, so the key thing for voiceover is in the HTML attribute, you can have, the HTML element, you can have a lang attribute. Set the language for the language that the page is in so that it reads with the correct sort of intonation and pronunciation as VoiceOver is reading through. And there's some YouTube videos where you can go and just search for like VoiceOver and language, and they'll show you sort of a Spanish site read with like a German VoiceOver pronunciation. And assuming you can speak either one of those languages, it's probably pretty humorous for you to see, because yeah, that can impact it a lot. Sure. Any other questions? Great. Well, thank you, everyone, and go forth and make your sites accessible.